Hello, I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Coming up after the news, it's Philosophy Talk.
Sounds like Led Zeppelin talk to me, Ken.
Well, our topic today, John, is the stairway to heaven, dignity, and the end of life.
Let's cut the euphemisms, Ken. We're going to talk about death. Death with dignity, death without dignity. Do you have the right to get the plug pulled when you're in pain and suffering and the end is near? How about to commit suicide? How about to have a physician help you commit suicide?
Yeah, these are some thorny philosophical questions about the nature of life, our right to life, our right to die. Some people think it's a compassionate thing to do this. Other people are deeply troubled by it.
Philosophy Talk, after the news.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor, his partner.
We're coming to you from the studios of KALW, FM 91.7, information radio for San Francisco and the surrounding communities.
But through our discussion, we're going to transport you down to Philosopher's Corner at Stanford University, where whenever we can get away with it, we like to just sit back, put all practical issues aside, and talk about ideas, pure thought.
The ideas we're going to talk about this week, though, Ken, have their practical side. We're all going to die, or so it seems, and a lot of us will face death after considerable pain, discomfort, despair, depression.
Oh, John, you're depressing me already.
Yeah. And the question is, what rights do we have to end that?
Yeah. There's this physician-assisted suicide question. Should there be physician-assisted suicide? What about euthanasia, where the doctor...
What's the difference between euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide?
Well, euthanasia is where the doctor... There's two different kinds of euthanasia. They're passive and active euthanasia. One, the doctor just withholds treatment from you and lets you die.
So that's legal everywhere. As far as I know, in America, you can insist that life-saving devices be removed.
Yeah, or you can say, doctor, give me something that will kill me, and then you take the thing, and that's physician-assisted suicide.
That's physician-assisted suicide, and that's legal in Oregon with lots of qualifications.
Let's see, I've missed one. Active euthanasia. Help me with that one.
Active euthanasia is when you don't say, doctor, help me commit suicide. You say, doctor, kill me.
Oh, that's murder, you mean?
Well, no, it's not murder. It's at least it's, I don't know, it's not murder in the Netherlands and Belgium where it's under certain circumstances, again, legal.
It's not murder because you request that the doctor
but
that's
not physician-assisted suicide. It's something else. That's not legal in Oregon.
Yeah,
So we've got some concepts here to deal with, but there's a lot of issues. There's kind of two slippery slopes here. On the one side, under what conditions do you let a person avail themselves of these things? Now Oregon says, well, it's got to be they're going to die of a terminal illness within a few months.
Within 6 months, I think.
Yeah, but if I'm going to die of a terminal illness within 2 years and I'm in terrible pain, aren't I worse off than the guy that's only got 6 months to go?
Well, maybe, but it's really it's a problem because then if you took that too far, you could say, look, if you're going to die, if you're really depressed, you don't have a terminal illness, you're just really depressed about the illness that you do have. You can't bear the depression. Why not avail yourself of physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia?
Well, or to go to the extreme, what if you're a heartbroken teenager and you don't think life is worth living? Surely somebody should step in and say, well, in this case, doesn't matter what you think. Yeah. We're not going to let you and we're not going to help you commit suicide.
Yeah, these are some really hard questions. I mean, especially this thing, even this difference between passive and active euthanasia. I mean, letting somebody die seems to many people morally okay, but actively killing somebody, doing something that actually causes their death, that's to many people worse. So, I mean, it's a very thorny thing.
Now, the Oregon law is in between. It's this physician-assisted suicide, and whether it's morally okay, we can discuss. Apparently, it's passed some legal hurdles. At least John Ashcroft doesn't have the right to strike it down.
And and people have actually used it, and we know this is a very agonizing thing. It's very, very agonizing. Amy Standen, our roving philosophical reporter, traveled up to Oregon to talk to some people who actually availed themselves of this opportunity. She files this report.
On February 13th, 2002, Dick Ferris, a 78-year-old retired commercial photographer from Oregon, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. His wife, Gloria, watched her husband's quick decline.
He was bleeding internally. He couldn't eat. He couldn't swallow. His mouth had sores in it, and he knew that whatever time he had here was not going to be quality time.
Long ago, Gloria and Dick had taken in a stray dog, a Doberman Pinscher. Eventually, the dog grew old and it began to die.
She lived with us until she was very old, and we both were holding her in the vet's office and petting her as she was given an injection, and she just went to sleep. It was the most beautiful passing. And he said, that's how I want to go. He said, if I'm ever in that position, don't let me linger. And I promised that I wouldn't. And I asked him to do the same thing.
Dick had also watched his father and 2 brothers die painfully from the same disease, and he knew unequivocally that he wanted something different. Gloria called Compassion in Dying, an Oregon group which advocates on behalf of terminally ill patients and facilitates physician-assisted deaths.
That was hard. It was a very strange, surreal feeling to be calling to get forms and information about helping someone die. It felt almost like calling to make a dentist appointment. It isn't that it was cold or odd. It just, there were certain questions they needed to ask. Did we understand that there were appointments that we needed to have, waiting periods to determine soundness of mind? And it's just the way it struck me, I guess, to pick up the phone and make an appointment to talk to someone about helping someone die.
The paperwork took 2 weeks, an almost unbearably long wait for Dick. But then, less than a month after his initial diagnosis, Dick was allowed to die.
We had a final doctor visit on Friday, and then all the arrangements were all right. And Monday morning, on March the 4th, the Compassion in Dying representatives came to give to him the lethal prescription, which I had picked up at the pharmacy, and that was another difficult trip. He was given a anti-nausea pill an hour before he would drink the prescription. And then my 3 daughters and 1 granddaughter were here. We all had time to spend some time. He spent some quality time with my girls and my granddaughter saying goodbye, and also with me. And then we were all in the room with him, and I was on the bed holding him. He had a hard time swallowing, so he wasn't sure he could get it all down, and he drank half of it. He looked around at us, and he said, if I had any more love, I'd have to keep it in Fort Knox. And I said, I'll see you in the morning, and he drank the rest. Only about 3 minutes later, he had passed on. And it was very peaceful, just what he asked for, just like with our dog at the vet. Very peaceful and quiet and surrounded by love. I'm really grateful. I am more grateful than I can tell you that my husband had that opportunity.
Oregon is the only state in the country with a death and dignity law, and it's under challenge from the federal government. Much of the objection is religious. The Vatican, for example, opposes all forms of suicide and euthanasia, which it calls, quote, a crime against life, an attack on humanity. For Philosophy Talk, this is Amy Standen.
Thanks, Amy, and thank you, Gloria, for sharing your story.
Our guest today is Professor Margaret Batten. She's going to join us to help us think through these thorny issues. She's the author of a number of things about this, including a book, Ethical Issues in Suicide. She's collected 15 years' worth of thinking about this in a collection of essays called The Least Worst Death. She's co-author of Praying for a Cure, an examination of the religious refusal of medical treatment. She joins us today from station KUER on the campus of the University of Utah, where she teaches. Professor Batten, it's a pleasure having you with us on Philosophy Talk.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. This is a very interesting and difficult topic, maybe one of the hardest, and it's a pleasure to talk with you about it and all those folks out there.
Well, Professor Batten, why don't we start with this question? Why would anyone object to what Dick Ferris did? When we hear from Mrs. Ferris how well it went and how filled with love it was, it sounds pretty unobjectionable. What are the philosophical reasons that people have for getting upset about this?
Well, let's start with the three major arguments against. I think are they were all alluded to there. One is the intrinsic wrongness of killing, the claim that killing is always wrong, and that deliberate killing is wrong. Another one is the worry about the integrity of the medical profession. So here the worry is, look, if we allow a sympathetic case like this, and this is a form of the third objection, also the slippery slope. If we allow a sympathetic case like this, it becomes too easy for doctors. It's easier than treating an illness that you can't really arrest. It's certainly easier than working with a difficult patient, and way more rewarding than working with a patient who can't pay. So the argument here is doctors would be gradually corrupted by this and led to do this more frequently, casually, cavalierly.
So far we've got a kind of a philosophical argument about the sacredness of life, and it's just absolutely wrong to kill, and a practical argument that this is going to undermine the doctor-patient relationship. It's going to be too easy for doctors, not to mention HMOs, to just encourage old, sick people to off themselves with a little help from the physician. What's the third argument?
And the third one is another version of the slippery slope argument, or another slippery slope argument, that if we allow a sympathetic case like the one of Dick Ferris, other parties will be in the position of nudging, urging, expecting people to off themselves, and that will lead by gradual degrees down a slippery slope which you can't reverse into moral holocaust. That greedy families, not only impatient physicians, callous insurers, governments in debt, whatever the party is that has an interest in somebody's life not continuing, will turn up and push folks in this direction. And it will weigh especially on people in vulnerable groups.
Right.
That's the claim.
That's like an argument against the death penalty that I actually think is a good argument. I don't know what you think. I mean, some people think, well, the death penalty isn't intrinsically wrong, but you can't trust, say, a highly divided capitalist state with a dominant social class that, doesn't look kindly on its lower social classes. You can't expect that state to fairly objectively enforce a death penalty. So, as a capitalist state where medical care is delivered by these capitalist means and these greedy, not the greedy families, but the greedy insurers and the desperate families, will put all sorts of social pressures on people. I mean, do you think those are, I know you're in favor of this, but so do you think those arguments are not convincing arguments?
I like to say that although what I've written and talked about so far puts me in favor, I'd like to always be rethinking this, and I think we should all be rethinking it. So when you make what looks like a good, cogent argument against it, that is, isn't there an analogy with the death penalty here? And we seek evidence that there are selective pressures in the death penalty. Look at racial disparities, for instance. Wouldn't the same happen here? Now, there's, of course, a striking difference between the death penalty and assisted dying, and that is that, at least in most cases, the death penalty isn't voluntary. It's not something a person elects.
Well, that's really
with a few
true.
exceptions,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But this is it's something done to you by typically by unsympathetic states or other parties.
Well, now, we've got these two classes of objections. One, the more philosophical one, having to do with the special place that human life holds in our moral values. The others, which I admit I'm a little sympathetic one, that physicians and governments and HMOs aren't to be trusted. But let's try to focus on the first one first. I mean, Kant says that you can't ever use a human as a means rather than an end. I don't know if he says you can't ever, but and he thinks that even suicide is illegitimate because you're using yourself as a means to end your suffering. Now, that sounds kind of weird, but on the other hand, we do want an ethical system that really gives a high and special value to human life. Can we do that and still have all these different ways of ending human life?
Professor Bagging, I'm going to ask you to hold your answer to that one till just after the break. You're listening to...
I was so excited about the mention of Kant.
Yeah, it'll give you a chance to think about it and really hammer John. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking with Professor Peggy Batten about dignity and the end of life. Is physician-assisted suicide an affront to the value and dignity of human life? Do we have to be on the brink of death to get a physician-assisted suicide? What about depression? I mean, all these slippery slopes. We'd like to hear what you have to say.
Give us a call at 415-841-4134, 415-841-4134, or go to our website, www.philosophytalk.org, and send us a comment.
Philosophy Talk will be right back.
When you're tired of worldly toil, shuffle off this mortal coil, turn your body back to soil. It's okay. It's okay.
That was Loudon Wainwright III with his always sort of uplifting suicide song. He says suicide is okay. I don't think even the philosophers who are fairly open to suicide, like David Hume, would agree that it's okay when you're blue or feeling a little depressed, though. This is Philosophy Talk, and we're trying to figure out about ways that people have of ending their own life. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're talking with Professor Peggy Batten of the University of Utah about dignity and the end of life. You can join our discussion by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Professor Batten, but before the break, I asked you, how about these philosophers, very thoughtful guys like Kant, that say a prohibition against taking human life is the absolute core and center of our ethical system, and even suicide needs to be absolutely prohibited. What do you think of that?
Well, Kant isn't entirely opposed to taking all life, but he is opposed to suicide, except, of course, in the special case of Cato. He suggests there may be one exception. It's worth thinking about why he has this.
You want to wait? I hate to sound ignorant, but you want to explain that one exception?
Cato?
Cato, yes.
Cato is the Roman general.
Oh, this isn't O.J. Simpson's.
No.
No. Right. Cato took himself to be preserving the liberty of his people by showing them that they didn't have to be subject to a conquering power.
Oh, yeah, that Cato. I remember now.
That Cato, right.
Okay, but anyway, you were about to tackle John's question here.
Well, the question is about moral rules, or to use a larger word, deontological systems generally that take as a basis an opposition to killing. And the first thing we want to say is to look at our own practice about killing and whether killing other human beings or one's own self is always wrong. Well, we practice killing in war. We practice killing in self-defense and think that morally justified. We practice killing in capital punishment, although that's certainly more controversial. And there are at least some cases in which we don't take killing per se to be wrong. But the question that we're introducing with Kant here is whether killing oneself in the circumstances he has in mind to spare unbearable pain, whether that's wrong. And
you think?
The question, well, I think he's actually wrong. He's wrong about some other things as well, like lying. I think there are times when one ought to lie.
Kant tended to go for the non-exception, where it
Right.
seems to many of us there are exceptions.
But what's he thinks you're somehow violating your own dignity when merely out of unbearable pain you take your life. I take it you think there's something wrong with that thought.
The thing that's so interesting is that he's the developer of this tremendously robust notion of autonomy, of respect for the autonomy of the subject, of the rational subject who gives himself or herself the moral law, and yet doesn't really trust that subject in this decision.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, I think there's another thing that if the circumstance he has in mind is taking one's life to end current unbearable pain, that suggests that there hasn't been prior reflection, that this isn't a matter of deeper values, that this is not something that one has thought about for years, or realizing that one is mortal, thought about how the end of one's life might eventually come. And parenthetically, let me just remark that in the developed world, probably 70% of us will face deaths of that involve a long downhill terminal course. So that doesn't appear to be the kind of situation that he's reflecting on, that he's has in mind, where this is really a considered, thoughtful, elective, deeply valuable choice.
So the kind of situations
A
he
deeply
probably had in mind are
value
ones we
connected.
might agree with him on. That is, depressed teenagers, people having midlife crises, people having illnesses that they may eventually grow out of, people facing disabilities that are new to them but they may eventually adjust to. Not these kind of I've thought it all through and this is the way I want to end my life and I've had a long one and the end is approaching anyway kind of decision. Now, who knows what Kant would have said if those were
Yeah.
common in his day, but
Yeah.
but his
Well,
theory isn't so remarkable if we focus on the kind of cases he was focusing
le-
on.
Let me
I'll
let me
take the
shift.
contrast. I was going to take the contrast between Gloria's account of her husband Dick Ferris's death, where it's clear that they had thought about this, reflected on it, watched examples like not only their Doberman Pinscher, but thought about the deaths of their other loved ones, that they were well informed and reflective about it and did it in advance. And compare that with Loudon Wainwright's suicide song, "When You Get the Blues and You Feel Like Shooting Yourself." That's impulsive. That's not reflective and not clearly rooted in one's own personal values. And it seems to me those two cases are entirely different.
So you think that
Kant-
that look, Kant's concern with autonomy should really make him respect that a well thought out, considered judgment about how my life shall end.
Ken, you want to just say autonomy? What's that mean?
He's self-government. I rule myself. I don't.
Okay.
I'm not anybody's property. I'm not even. I'm not a thing.
I'm
a
in charge. I'm in
self-governing-
charge of myself.
I'm in charge of myself, my life. It's up to me how my life shall go in some deep way. And to allow people this decision to end their life is kind of an ultimate expression of autonomy. Is that the right way to think about it?
I think, well, that's the way I think he should have thought about it. And I'm sorry he's not available to have test cases posed to us. But of course, it's worth remembering that Kant was writing and thinking before the kinds of conditions which are so prevalent now, that is, deaths of long downhill terminal courses. Before that was the sort of normal way that people died. This was, of course, before antibiotics, before many of the life-prolonging kinds of medical technologies that we have. And the world in which death occurred there would have looked very different from the world of dying that we face. So I think he just doesn't consider the kind of circumstance which is making this problem come to the fore right now.
So one of the great advances of modernity gives us a problem, right?
Right.
Life prolonging. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking with Professor Margaret Batten of the University of Utah about death and the dignity and the end of life. You can join our conversation by calling 415-841-4134. And we have a caller on the line now. That's Bert in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Bert.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for taking my call.
You're
I'm
welcome.
a person living with AIDS, and I've had HIV since 1985, and I have literally lost hundreds of friends, of which I would say a handful, probably about 20, have chosen to take their own life and not go down that horrible path of a long, lingering death. I really believe that nobody has the right to tell me that that's not my choice. My father had terminal cancer, and he and my mother decided to fight it out to the very end, but that was his choice.
Yeah.
So Bert, if something was on the ballot in California to give us an Oregon-type physician-assisted suicide law, you'd be in favor of it.
Absolutely, because I don't think people take this lightly. I really don't. This is something that people really contemplate. And when your quality of life is about living in bed and crapping all over yourself and being hooked up to tubes and constantly being put on pain meds, I think people get to have that choice.
Well, Bert, given your experience with HIV over a considerable period of time, would you have any worries that physicians in the medical establishment would be pushing people to make this choice so they weren't really totally autonomous about it?
I really don't believe that doctors would do that. I have had more than my fair share of doctors in the last 20 years, and that's just not my experience. Doctors take this very seriously.
Thanks you very much, Bert. That's a great call. Peggy, do you have any comments to add to?
Sure. First, it's important to, I think, be aware that at least within the gay communities of especially San Francisco and Los Angeles, physician-assisted suicide has in effect been virtually openly available, partly because the gay community in those particularly well-informed places has been quite cohesive, and partly because there are a number of physicians with the same condition who have understood the problem and been willing to share. That's now pretty well documented in a very interesting book by Roger Magnuson called Angels of Death. Same thing has gone on in Australia, where he also did research. So that's an opportunity that is an option that has been open to people with AIDS, at least who live in places where there are reasonably high concentrations of people who are well informed. And in many ways, it's a model. It involves caring. It involves choice. The important thing about what Bert said was that while he'd had a number of friends who did this, he clearly also had a number of friends who didn't. That's a mark of a choice.
We're talking to Professor Margaret Batten from the University of Utah about dignity and the end of life. Give us a call at 415-841-4134 and give us some comments and questions about this whole set of issues.
Professor Batten, or Peggy, should I call you
Peggy? Right.
Peggy, Bert wasn't worried about the doctors, and I guess I'm not worried too much about the doctors either, but I am worried about, the insurance industry. I can imagine there comes a time, if this practice is widely accepted and available, that someone who made the other choice, who doesn't want to do this, right? I can imagine an insurance industry deciding, well, look, additional care for this person is just futile. I mean, and we don't pay for futile treatments.
Now,
and there is this widely available, acceptable practice of, okay, that's it.
Ken, I want to evince some fair and balanced skepticism here. Even if we had single payer, that is, even if we had socialized medicine, single payer, government medicine, I'd still be worried. I saw what happened in California with gambling. When I was a kid, gambling was bad. When I moved to California, gambling was bad. We didn't allow gambling in California. Now we have the lottery, and the state puts on ads encouraging people to take their hard-earned bucks and buy lottery tickets.
Well, whoever pays the freight, whether it's the state or whether it's the capitalist corporation, is going to say there's some temptation back there in the boardrooms or in the law writing rooms to say, hey, wait a minute, why should we pour money down the drain?
I saw a proposal to let people who are 60 and over apply for death licenses. So I might have a death license before I even get my discount at the movie theater.
Peggy, what do you think about our skepticism about?
I think skepticism is extraordinarily healthy. That's part of the point of this program, isn't it? Here are 4 answers. First one is if you're worried about unscrupulous insurers, governments, whoever pays the bucks, that worry should be greater for what we do allow, namely allowing to die, the passive euthanasia you were talking about at the beginning. That is, withholding treatment, withdrawing treatment, turning down the oxygen or turning up the morphine, because those things have fewer protections and are much less visible and open to public scrutiny. Point 2, supposing you did think that the prospect of cost savings was great, then you'd want to try to figure out how great that would be. So a couple of years ago, Zeke Emanuel, a physician and a well-known opponent of this practice, and I tried to figure out just how much you'd save. So we published this in the New England Journal after a while. We took the frequency with which the practice was used in the Netherlands at the time. That's about 3% of people who die. And you multiply that by the number of people who die per year. It's about 1% in both that country and this one. And you multiply that by the amount of funds expended at the end of life. There are some wild beliefs about how great those are. You see estimates of 70, 80%, 90% of money is spent the last month of life. That's actually not true. The level is much lower.
That's an urban legend.
It's about 10%. It's an urban medical legend, right?
Okay.
And you multiply all that, and the actual savings that you can estimate would occur in this country if our practice looked like that of the Netherlands is actually minuscule.
So
there would be
So the pressure would
that-
not be that high from that you're suggesting. That seems to be an optimistic view. We have some callers in the line I'm going to let in here.
Great. And I have two more points to say on that point, so I'm ready.
We'll come back. Kimberly in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Kimberly.
Hello. Hi, I'm calling in 20 years ago when I was about 20. My grandfather, who was 83 at the time and was not ill, but he was an immigrant and had pretty much lived what you could describe as the American dream, a wonderful life, very full life. He, amazingly went and visited him right before he committed suicide, days before. And he said goodbye to me simply, and on some intuitive level I must have known. I wrote him a goodbye note. And he said about his own suicide, rather than sit around twiddling my thumbs, waiting to die by sickness or accident, I'm not killing myself, it's not some tragedy, I'm just peacefully passing. And as much as I'm, a Christian and a person who has a great reverence for life, I never had any problem with that, on a fundamental level. I never judged him, and I just respected the dignity with which he felt like he lived a full life. And, it was shocking at the time, but also not shocking. It was very sort of consistent. He lived life to the fullest and was ready to go.
Kimberly, was there anything in your grandfather's religious background that, would he tend to be philosophical? And
he was a deeply philosophical person. I never talked to him about faith. He was just a strong individual, and if I had to say, sort of observe what his philosophy was, it was that of just living life with such a robustness and with such a wholeheartedness that it really spoke of cherishing life. And I think in that spirit, he knew when he couldn't live it so fully, he was ready to go.
Thanks, Kimberly. That's a very touching story. Peggy, it seems to me that's one thing we haven't focused. I mean, the Catholic Church says that a suicide in all forms, and I guess euthanasia as well, is an affront to the dignity of life or something like that. And we hear these stories about somehow this respects the dignity of life. And I'd like to think about how that could be, how killing or letting die and not intervening and to try and keep alive respects the dignity of life. I mean, help me think about that.
Well, the first thing to remember, I think, here is that we're not really talking about the difference between life and death. What we're talking about here in these cases is death earlier in an easier way that is more in keeping with the values of the person involved versus death a little later in a harsher way. So it's actually death versus death, not life versus death.
Or maybe you can think of it as life versus life. Would I like my life?
Or you could think of it as...
Yeah, would I like my life? There's going to be an end to this story. And I want a certain kind of end rather than another end. The choice between the way the story ends is a choice between two different lives. And which do I want?
Right.
Yeah.
So autonomy all the way up through the very tippy end of life. And it's important to have a full range of choice at the very tippy end of life as it is at any other point in life.
Yeah. You're listening
we shouldn't write people off by controlling them.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. With us today is Professor Peggy Batten of the University of Utah. We'd like you to join our discussion. Please call us at 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Philosophy Talk will be right back.
In this land.
Hot Tuna with Death Don't Have No Mercy, a song written by the great Reverend Gary Davis. I'm John Perry, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. We're kicking around about the best way to kick the can today on Philosophy Talk. Ooh, who wrote that joke? Our guest is Professor Peggy Batten of the University of Utah. Peggy, at some point there were 4 points you wanted to make, and you got through 2, and then we took some callers. Why don't you give me your other 2 points?
There are so many points you want to make about this. There's some other things I think that need to be talked about as well. One of them is that, and I'll go back to the other points if we have time, one of them is that we have to remember this is an international issue as well. We always think about it in our isolated USA, the only way sort of way. But in fact, this issue is pressing and interesting and has been partly legalized in not only the Netherlands, but Belgium, Switzerland. It never was illegal in Germany, that is self-deliverance. It was briefly legal in Australia. It's on the edge in many other places, Canada. This is an issue that is confronting much of the developed world, especially that part with a liberal philosophical background.
Right. So we want to help them think about that, those
Yeah,
philosophical
you bet.
issues here. Let me ask you a question. Some people think that there's a moral distinction, a morally significant distinction between letting someone die. So it's all right to withhold the treatment and let them die, not to intervene, not to take extraordinary measures, but that for another person to actively kill, right? So for the doctor to actively kill the patient, they think that's just deeply problematic.
So to put this in context, this is the difference between active and passive euthanasia. And you might say physician-assisted suicide is fine, but how about those people who can't perform that final act themselves? Should we really, as Oregon does, not allow the actual physician to commit the final act? Is there a big moral distinction between that active and that passive euthanasia?
What do you think, Peggy?
Well, it's been assumed that should be the protective feature. James Rachels made a famous argument about 20 years ago, arguing that it's just the other way around, at least in certain cases, that in some cases letting die, which might mean allowing a person to suffer a more extended period as the disease kills him, is much less humane and more wrong than actually ending his life.
Right. You watch the person. You watch the person
Right.
writhe in agony for
Right.
months, and when you could take a step to end that agony.
Right.
Yeah.
I
So
think
there
he
are-
or somebody else had a famous case where two truck drivers were in an accident, and one was trapped in the truck and was burning to death. The other one couldn't get him out, and the fellow who was burning begged him to get the gun out of the back
Right.
and shoot him, which he did. And it seemed intuitively to Rachel's, and I guess to me, that was the right thing to do.
Mhm. Yeah, we have had practices like the coup de grace in war. We don't practice that anymore because probably of our MASH kind of orientation, where we think we can, rescue anybody. But the assumption that letting die is somehow better than killing and killing is worse is part of what makes this debate so uncomfortable. I think it's often backwards.
Let's let some callers join this debate. Kevin in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Kevin.
Hi, thank you. I've seen many people and animals who have terminal illnesses often take their own life without the assistance of a medical person, whether usually you see them as they deteriorate, they just stop eating. And I think people and animals, they know when it's their time to go, and I think any kind of law that prevents people from making those very personal choices is at its root authoritarian, and it actually impedes. And actually, I think it does the opposite. It actually degrades human life.
Kevin, I take your point that if we rob the person of a choice to just die, that would be bad. But what about robbing another of the permission to kill? I mean, what about that? If we say to the doctors, you cannot kill your patients. You can let them die if they choose that, but you cannot kill them.
Well, then I don't understand how that is any better than keeping people alive. I think there's just as much of a danger as far as greed and as far as bad medical practice to keep someone alive whose time it is to die than to prevent a doctor from stepping in and with the family's permission and with the person's permission to allow them to go peacefully.
Thanks, Evan. Peggy, is there anywhere in the world where the doctor can actually do the final act?
Sure, the Netherlands,
yeah.
also Switzerland. The doctor can be associated with, but the Netherlands is the best example. In fact, the Netherlands requires that it be the physician and will not permit a nurse, a family member, any other caregiver, or any other party to do it. It has to be the physician, and they regard that as a protective. Physicians take this tremendously seriously. It's difficult for them, but they believe it's an appropriate part of medical practice in cases. And it's, of course, widely understood and known about, widely approved of by the society. And I've spent a lot of time in the Netherlands. One of the things that was said to me once in my travels somewhere that made the biggest impact was, you Americans, you have to worry about dying more than we Dutch do. we don't have to worry about it in the way you are consigned to by your more restrictive laws.
Yeah, that's because we Americans perhaps like hunger for the last drop of life. I mean, it's something about our culture. We think of life as never let go of it,
Yeah,
never
but
let go.
there's a value judgment under there that some people may make about their own lives and other people may not. Now, the value judgment about the value of other people's lives is quite a different thing. So
Yeah.
if I'm judging the value of your life, John or Ken or Kevin, who's still on the phone, that's a very different thing from my judging whether, given that my death is coming anyway, I want to try to eke out more minutes or more days or more hours, or
Let me ask
or let it end more gently.
sort of
gently.
a practical / philosophical question about this this one slippery slope. Now, if in Oregon, I don't know whether it's 3 months or 6 months, I'm 3 months to 6 months to dying, certified by a physician, I've got the right kind of disease to die and I'm in pain, I can get physician-assisted suicide. If I'm 2 years from dying with the same amount of pain, I can't. Now, I can see the practical point, but philosophically, that's very hard to justify. Is there any curb we can put to stop the slip down the slippery slope that makes a
break.
little more sense than
Yeah.
that?
And where do we break the ambulance or something?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a question always about constraints on public policies and how we try to what controls or protections we erect to avoid abuse. So the terminal illness is the one that that Oregon has used, along with documentation of requests and so on. It's not true in the Netherlands. So the Netherlands doesn't require that you be terminally ill. What it does require is that you be facing intolerable suffering that cannot be alleviated in any way acceptable to the patient.
Doesn't the Oregon law, it's really problematic, isn't it? Because doesn't it say that if you're a year from death, basically what you are is 6 months away from that point at which you can take this
Right.
option.
Right.
And that's like Brakel's point is now you're making the
Right.
person suffer intolerably for these 6
Right.
months. I mean,
Now, the good news in Oregon is that Oregon is the state which has seen probably the greatest improvements in palliative care, in the use of hospice, in the use of morphine, and in many other technologies for trying to alleviate suffering. So if it's the suffering that's the issue, there's been lots of really good work devoted to this issue. You could also elect to refuse treatment and die if the treatment is life-sustaining. And you could even undergo terminal sedation. That is, you could refuse, you could elect full sedation, but refuse artificial nutrition and hydration, which would mean that you would die. So it's not as though there isn't a way out. But suffering doesn't appear to be the central issue in these issues.
Right.
It's much more about control, self-respect, self-determination, about one's own conception of who you are and what the end of life, what your conception of what I like to call the least worst death is.
Yeah.
I don't mean to suggest that death is a good thing, or but that there are some ways of dying that are much worse than others, and that's different for different people. That's where the real autonomous point comes in.
yeah, I think these are really tough issues, and you've helped us think a lot about them. We could go on, unfortunately. Our
Yes.
time is limited. Death will, the end of the show will come no matter what. We've been
Right.
joined today.
We're not allowed to end it early, however, no
That's
matter
true.
how painful.
But we have been joined today by Professor Margaret Batten of the University of Utah. She has just published Praying for a Cure, a jointly authored volume on the ethics of religious refusal of medical treatment. Her collection of essays of her thoughts from a span of 15 years is called The Least Worst Death, as she just mentioned. Professor Batten, thanks you so much for joining us on Philosophy Talk.
It's a pleasure, and this is an issue that every single listener and participant in this show gets to grapple with, so I'm glad to be involved.
Thanks, Peggy, for helping us grapple with it.
So, John, what did you learn today?
Well, I think sometimes people say philosophy makes no progress, but I think in bioethics and medical ethics, if you look at the literature over the years, particularly the last 40 years, there's been a lot of progress made. And you don't have, in philosophy, you don't get these final answers everybody agrees on, but you get a lot of distinctions and arguments that are better understood. And I think Professor Batten was a good example of the level of sophistication at which people come at this now.
Yeah, there's one beautiful thing she said that we didn't pick on very much, that, you know what, this problem is partly of our own creating, because modern medicine keeps us alive so long and almost guarantees that the end is going to be awful.
Well, we've reached the end of this discussion, Ken.
Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door.
Ken, it's that time again.
Oh, what time would that be, John?
Conundrum time.
Oh, you mean somebody's going to call in and we're going to confuse them. We have a caller on the line now. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Martina.
Hi, thank you so much.
Where are you calling from, Martina?
Austin, Texas.
What do you do there in Austin, then?
Well, I'm a graphic designer, and that's actually why I'm calling you guys.
Oh, well, so tell us about your conundrum.
Well, mostly since graduating, I've been freelancing and working on projects that have meant a lot to me and have been really important to me for one reason or another. But recently, in 2 years, I haven't worked as much as I'd like.
You're a struggling artist, in other words.
Yeah. One of the few options I've got is, to go a little bit more corporate. And I've got a really great opportunity to go to work for a really big company and work in their marketing department. I'm doing
marketing, the M word, marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and your conundrum is take the money or be
yeah,
true to your art?
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Do I read between the lines that you don't exactly share the goals of this nameless company?
Yeah, I don't share the goals of this company.
Well, Martina, your conundrum really is a classic case of the kind of problem that pits utilitarianism versus more Kantian or rule-based models. The utilitarian would say, well, let's look at how much good this is going to bring to how many people. Now, even if this company is pretty vile, they'll hire someone to do this job, and they'll probably find someone more enthusiastic and committed to it than you. They may do a better job at selling burgers or exercise machines or depriving people of money they would spend better on something else than you will. So from that point of view, you're taking the job is a good thing. The bad part is that you'll be spending time doing this that you won't be spending time on your art, but if you're really hungry and penniless, you're going to be doing something else.
Yeah, it sounds like you're urging her to do it, John, but let's take a parallel example using your reasoning. Suppose that there was somebody who's they needed an executioner, and you're not really enthusiastic about working for this vile company that goes around executing people. By your argument, you should go ahead and be the executioner. That doesn't quite sound like compelling reasoning to me.
Well, that would be the utilitarian point of view. But people on the other side would say, no, this whole point of reasoning just discounts a person's own projects. You become, Bernard Williams puts it, you become more or less a slave to the projects and goals of others if you accept this kind of reasoning.
Oh, well, I want to help Martina. I don't want to help the world. And the question is, what should Martina do with her life? I think you'd have to think about how much you object to this company. If it's like working for some, really morally bankrupt polluter of the environment and this, that, and the other thing, you might not want to contribute to their overall project. But if you just find it distasteful but not morally objectionable, and you have to live your life, you can view this as a stage which you're going to get beyond because you're not going to develop a resume and all that sort of stuff. But it depends on how deeply you object to the company.
Yeah, I'm going to have to think about that one long and hard because ultimately I don't know how much I object to what they want me to do,
Well, on that note, we probably illuminated you as little as we're going to, or as much as we're going to.
No, you guys have, now I actually have some way of thinking about it besides just wishing I didn't have to make the decision.
Right. Instead of just sitting there wondering what to do, you can sit there and wonder what to do using the vast machinery of philosophical analysis to clarify things.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Martina. Bye-bye.
If something's worrying you, if you've got something drumming away at your conum, then we'd be happy to wrap our brains around your problem. Just send an email to conundrums@philosophytalk.org, or even better, go to our website and click on the Conundrums button.
Yeah, that website is www.philosophytalk.org. I don't know what a conum is or whatever that was you said, John. Remember to leave your contact information so we can get in touch with you, and we'll see if we want to use your conundrum. Once again, that address is www.philosophytalk.org. Click on the conundrums button.
Conum is a Indo-Serbian word that is the basis of our word cranium, and that's where conundrums come from.
Okay, it's time to do the
take
credits,
it.
John.
Take it from me,
Time
Ken.
to do the credit.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2004.
Hey, you got it right this time. Our executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Nicole Sawaya, Roman Mars, and David Latulippe.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Hoover Institution, the Greenwald Foundation, and the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association.
Also from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, the members of KALW Information Radio 91.7 San Francisco, where our program originates, and special thanks to our crack research team back at Stanford, which has two new members, Elizabeth Phillips and Shella Sadovnik.
Yeah, they did great work this week. The views expressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders, and all the ones that will make you mad, they're John's views, not mine.
Absolutely. The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm his partner, Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.